Hello, everyone. I am Halim Yanikomeroglu from Carleton University. Just let me share my screen and we will take it from there. Testing, you see one slide at a time, right? Not two slides.
No, I see the big slide and the small one as well. The presenter view.
Actually, let me try to. Is it still one?
Yeah, now only one slide.
I see. Yeah. Okay, that is good. Thank you, Teslim. Well, Department of Systems and Computer Engineering at Carleton University has this program of sharing the experience. We started for our recent faculty members. The department has hired quite a number of new faculty members, but it turned out that we learn from each other, whether we are around for a while or newcomers. So today it is my turn, and I selected this topic, the art and science of publishing in scholarly venues. Now, I don't want to disappoint people, but it turned out that it is a very long presentation. As such, I decided to divide it into two parts, and today it will be only part one, to be continued at a later time. And I'll just show the agenda in a moment. I put at the end of the first slide that I have been a faculty member since 1998. Basically, for 23 years, I am in this business of scholarly activities. As a matter of fact, even a better starting point would be when I started my master's back in 1990. So more than 3 decades of experience in publishing as a author, reviewer, editor. And I thought that it will be nice to have a discussion to share some viewpoints. So part one, actually today, I will not even be able to get into the strategies for successful outcome in publishing, which is an accept decision, obviously. So things that comes to mind first, for instance, conference paper versus journal paper, and then how to create a good first impression, response letter, resubmissions. I will discuss those in the second part. Today, I would like to share my experience and views on why we are making this discussion to start with. In the last 30 years that I have been in the business, the context and dynamics have been changing, and it has actually accelerated that change during the COVID times, as I will try to explain. So in this 45 minutes, I would like to talk about competition, citations, bibliometrics, so on and so forth. And then the floor will be open for discussion another 45 minutes perhaps. So hopefully in an hour and a half, we will wrap up. In any event, while I am speaking, if you have any comments, questions, please feel free to interrupt me. The more interactive, the better it is. Let me start with a number of remarks, which are disclaimers in many ways. Doing good research is certainly necessary. If there is no good research, the discussion stops there. But the point is, good research itself, although it is necessary, often not sufficient. In general, you will see this term typical. I will be using a lot in my presentation. So I am referring to typical cases, and typical cases would be ambitious faculty members, new or older, like all of us, I guess, or researchers who are trying to do good research with good impact, taking this seriously, but not exceptional cases. I have a lot to say on that. because if something is exceptionally good, it is remarkable by all means. If we are talking about 0.01 percentile, maybe some of these things are less relevant or not relevant. I have in mind in this presentation a typical good research portfolio and research outcomes. So today, the discussion is not about how to do good research, but rather about the surrounding dynamics. Now, I will share my experience. I don't have really any data. It is mainly accumulated anecdotes, but as you can imagine, in more than 3 decades, there is a lot of that to share with. Also, my experience is limited to the IEEE community. Even within IEEE, there are, each society is a community by itself. And furthermore, in many cases, a society would have multiple journals, and each of them might be a community again. Nevertheless, I have worked on very many topics over the years. I think I am familiar with the IEEE landscape pretty much, but there is, for instance, for people more on the computing side, there is the ACM community, and in the audience we have friends and researchers from industrial engineering. That is a different community as well. So keep in mind that I am coming from the IEEE background. I already made this remark. It is based on my personal experience over quite a bit of time at different capacities. And I also would like to acknowledge that there is no single winning strategy or viewpoint. There are very different strategies, pretty much in everything related to doing research. As a matter of fact, when we run these series, different faculty members talk on different topics, and I feel that I don't always agree. I do things in a very different way, and it is an indication that there is no single way of doing things. I would like to acknowledge that. So my goal here is not really to give anyone a recipe. I am not in that position, but here is my experience. Do whatever you deem appropriate with that. So if you find some of these relevant, feel free to adopt, or if you think that they are not relevant to your context, that is fine as well. And some of the discussion items might be a bit contentious. For instance, people have very different views on bibliometrics, citations, and so on. In any event, I'll talk about my feelings about them. Once again, this is quite an important disclaimer for the entire presentation. I have a typically good researcher in mind, a caring, someone who is trying to do a good job. But if anyone here is not in that category, if you are exceptionally talented, truly remarkable potential, a genius, once again, many of these things may not be relevant. So keep in mind, in the distribution of all researchers, if we have some sort of a probability distribution PDF of all researchers with respect to some KPI, key performance indicator, if anyone is in the 0.1 percentile, I'm not talking about that crowd. So let me build on that. I feel it is quite unfortunate to take some practices of some geniuses and then give that as an example, especially to ECRs, early career researchers. I always felt very uncomfortable with that approach. Of course, people who are doing that are doing with good intention to motivate and so on. but it is often very much out of the context. A good example is Einstein, for instance. He comes up in this kind of discussions often. Einstein moved to Princeton in 1932, and until he died, 55, he spent more than 2 decades in Princeton. And I checked his publications. I don't know whether the list I checked is complete or not. In the first 2 years, he had some publications in German, so probably these originated from his older work. But in over 2 decades, he had about 34 papers, which is about 1 or at most 2 papers a year. So what does that mean? Because there are other geniuses who were very productive. That is, they probably published 10 papers a year. So this, an example like that is creating the impression that lower is the better. The number of publications is, the better it is. Not necessarily. We have examples of all sorts. Again, Einstein in Princeton, he didn't supervise any graduate student, as far as I know. I mean, he taught and he mentored and so on, but he wasn't a supervisor. So again, what does that mean? Should we all emulate that? There are other extremely successful researchers, scientists, Nobel laureates who have graduated 50 PhDs. Another example, I hope Einstein will not mind that I am picking on him. I don't know this as a fact, but I suspect that he never got any research grant. So $0 over 22 years, but I'm not sure about that. Anyhow, so again, there are other remarkable scientists and faculty members who bring in tens of millions of dollars. There are all types of examples. So keep in mind that this is what I am saying, that these examples from very exceptional cases, they are not really representative. So Einstein, nobody touched him in Princeton for 22 years because he was Einstein. So take me, if, for instance, at Carleton, for 20 years, I don't supervise any students. I don't bring in a cent to the university. And then, on average, 1 paper a year, I guess the department chair and the dean will come after me for a good reason. So again, keep that in mind. And especially for ECRs, these things are important. I see some comments in the chat, but I will take them once I finish this slide. So another example, Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg, they dropped out of college. That is true. But it doesn't mean that all billionaires are college dropouts. The most rich person, I think now it is Elon Musk, a third of $1 trillion, his wealth, and second one, Jeff Bezos, they both have degrees. So it is not a rule that if you want to be successful in industry, you must not attend university, right? My daughter, the second one among the 3, is quite interested in business. So imagine me telling her that, oh, drop the school. She's a 3rd-year university student. The proper advice is, go to school, finish your degree, and then pursue your business ambitions. Now, you might say that these guys are in business. How about in science? We have examples like that. A very good example that comes to my mind is the great genius number theorist, Ramanujan, who died very prematurely in his 30s. He dropped out of college as well. But once again, there are, I guess, all the Nobel laureates I am aware of, they have a university degree, and probably all of them have PhDs. So another exceptional example, which is, it is good, interesting to know, but it is not a role model. That is my point. And my final example is something more recent. I remember this incident this eccentric mathematician from St. Petersburg, Perelman. He is in hiding actually, so we don't hear about him. But about, I guess, 2010 or even earlier, he had some very big contributions at very young age. And he has this quoted paper, the entropy formula for the Ricci flow and its geometric applications. Not that I understand what it is, but in math circles, it's a very celebrated paper. And he posted this in arXiv. It is not peer-reviewed. So again, what does it mean? We don't publish in peer-reviewed journals. And Perelman himself, he also published in peer-reviewed journals. It's not that all his work is in unpeer-reviewed places. So the conclusion here is that these type of examples are interesting, but they are non-representative and they are misleading in many ways. In particular, for early career researchers, I would be very cautious to give examples of this sort. Now, I would like to pause here, go to chat box. So yeah, Shri Raman and Babak, I see your comments basically. So we have more to discuss on this. Here, my position is not sacrificing quality for quantity, absolutely not that. But the point is that a new faculty member joining the department, my department, any department, after just 4 years, her file will be in front of the tenure committee. So, so it is, again, I'm here I'm not saying, I just go back to this issue of typically good research. So if that researcher is a genius, 1 in 10 million, don't bother even coming to Carleton University. Just do whatever you want, all the wild things. And all this discussion does not apply to you. But what I am saying is that beware of the dynamics. There are evaluations and people want to see some outcome. It wouldn't cut in the tenure committee saying that I'm working on something very important and at the moment it is not published yet. Anyhow, I guess my points are clear. But if anyone, Shri Raman, including yourself, would like to unmute yourself, you are more than welcome.
Oh, thanks, Halim. I just wanted to say that many of the eccentric people that you pointed out there in your slide, most of them were, I think they were all outliers, if I should say. And so the common pool where we all, or at least I said, is in the mean, which means that all the things that you're going to say now will apply to us, not the ones that you pointed out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shri Raman. I also would like to add again that it also doesn't mean that if someone is a genius, she should not go to university, she should not do peer-reviewed publications, she must never supervise a PhD. There's nothing like that. You know, these are some eccentric examples. We have many other brilliant scientists who do all of these things that we mentioned. In the chat box, I also saw a remark about Perelman declining this Fields Award and $1 million prize. A very interesting person. I don't want to get into too much to Perelman. I would suggest that you just Google and learn about him. So let us move on. Another discussion, which I find very interesting, once again, let us be aware of that. The dynamics in academia are changing rapidly, and competition in general, and in particular when it comes to competition in publishing, getting more fierce, especially for the privileged. This is this needs explanation, and I think it will become clear as we move forward. And this is not necessarily something negative. My point is those of us in the West who are more privileged, whether we like it or not, that is the case in many ways, that segment will face more and more competition. So let us start the discussion. Old days, and old days is really when I started as a master's student. That's the first time I started looking at journals and so on. So early 90s, let us say. Well, at the time, access to scholarly circles was very limited. I mean, if, let us say, you are in a developing country, say Turkey, the example that I know best. I didn't do research in Turkey in those days, but I remember that my school's library, and by the way, I studied at the Middle East Technical University, one of, I guess, the most resourceful at the time, and still, it was very difficult. It would be difficult to find a journal issue due to financial reasons and other factors. And you would not know what is happening on the other side of the world in the research circles. And if you, I mean, you can do an experiment, go to explore if you wish, take a 1990 issue of transactions in your area and look at where the papers were from 30 years ago and where they are today, where they are coming from, the institutions, countries. In those days, they were mainly from the US, and even in the US, from the well-known schools in the US. And as a matter of fact, in my own area, that is communications, if you go to the formative years, like 1950s and 60s, a good chunk of the remarkable work in early days were done at AT&T, Bell Labs, and MIT. So just since I started from the developing countries, I should say the following. The dynamics have been such that many of the professors in good schools in developing countries were trained in the US or UK. So they come as good, very well-trained instructors. So the undergraduate teaching quality would be very good because the teachers are very good. However, once again, due to all these reasons, research potential, not potential, but research environment would be very limited. And then those good students who graduate from undergrad degrees, many of them would go to, again, Europe or US or Canada in my case. So that was the dynamic at the time. So what changed? Lots of things changed. First and foremost, now we have like middle-class income families, more middle-class countries. And some of these countries are big, India and China, first and foremost. And again, some of them have ambitious research programs. Anyone who is interested in the politics of research must examine China as a tremendous success story. What China did in the last quarter century is truly remarkable. It started from here, and now, it's out of the video even, China is at a very different place in just a quarter of a century. And they had quite a number of very successful programs still running. For instance, China Scholarship Council, I guess CSC. So many students are sent abroad with full scholarship. And then 1,000 talent program. Lots of faculty members, Chinese or otherwise, in the West are invited back to China to permanently or for collaboration. Anyhow, this is a textbook example that should be studied. And then, of course, internet. When internet came, it was a big equalizer, and then digital libraries emerged for pretty much, I guess, most people here you started your research with IEEE Explore, but it didn't exist not too long ago, right? We had to go to libraries and find the issues if you can find. Now it is accessible, and then all sorts of open access portals, even in IEEE Explore, as we all know, open access is getting quite common, but there are other portals as well. Until recently, the only factor that were pulling some people behind was conference travel. People would say that, okay, you know, we have instantaneous access to journal publications. So if some paper appears in the early access part of IEEE Explore, whether you are in the US or Turkey, you have access at the same time. But that research was conducted probably 2 years ago. You know, doing the research and review process takes a while. The real cutting edge ideas, these are discussed in panels, conferences, workshops. Some people are disadvantageous position because of lack of funding, whatever, visa problems. Even my students at Carleton, many of them international, they cannot travel easily. A side effect of COVID is that now even conferences are online. And there are so many seminars happening. All of them are free, as far as I know. And many major conferences, in particular for students, if you are a non-author, access is either extremely cost effective or even free for many conferences. So now there is even no reason to fall behind. Now, a kind of a iffy comment, but many people would argue that researchers in developing countries, if necessary, they are ready to work longer than those of us in developed countries. I don't know this as a fact. And if that is the case, it is actually not something good. We all want work and life balance. But that may not exist like the way it exists in the West, in some other countries, which means that people work long hours, long days, weekends, and then naturally they produce more. And then I am in the same competition pool with them. And my final remark, as a result of all of these, and presumably other factors as well, access to scholarly circles pretty much possible from everywhere, anywhere and everywhere. So today, if you take an IEEE journal, November issue of, say, transactions on wireless communications, you will find a good chunk of the articles are coming from China, Southeast Asia, Middle East, again, anywhere and everywhere. There are much fewer reasons for my colleagues in Turkey not doing quality research and par with people in Europe and in the US. So the final remark in this slide is that these are all good news for the less privileged people, or people who were less privileged last decade, 2 days ago. And it is a fact that this Western privilege is decreasing. I'm not saying this as good or bad, but something to be aware of for the researchers, especially, say, at Carleton, since this is a Carleton seminar. The competition is worldwide. The number of perhaps transaction is the same, but now for that, say, 30 papers in an issue, it is not a North American competition, it is a global competition. So let me pause here another minute if there are any questions or remarks. We will have discussion at the very end, but if there is a very quick remark, I would be happy to hear.
I can comment on this if it's all right. I agree with you that you can do research from anywhere in the world, but I think when you are getting reviewed, sometimes if it is not double blind, for example, where you submit your paper actually matters, and it affects your review results. Unfortunately.
I would unfortunately agree. I was planning to get into that discussion in part 2. Yeah, very unfortunately, I agree with you. Nevertheless, I will reiterate that due to all these reasons, this gap is decreasing. And for the overall good, perhaps this is good news, and people in the West just to be aware of. That is my point. Let me continue. So let us see what is the next discussion. Okay, so here, how about assessing the value or impact of a paper or the research portfolio of someone? There is an applicant to somewhere in the academic context. How do you make that assessment? So here, obviously, another possible title for this slide would be quality versus quantity. And I think everyone here would agree that quality is what matters. But once again, this is a complicated discussion, whether we like it or not. So first and foremost, in a typical case, this assessment is not easy. Once again, typical is the word in this presentation. If a paper is junk, well, then probably most people will quickly realize that it is junk and end of the story. And if a paper is remarkably good, probably, hopefully, it will be recognized as such. And then again, that is another category, perhaps 1%. But most of the papers submitted to a journal, let us say, to a good journal, they would not be neither junk nor a profound game-changing paper. And that middle is very broad, and making the assessment is not easy for a number of reasons. And I'll just list the 3 of them. First of all, a thorough assessment requires time. Just let us be honest. As a reviewer, for instance, if you have a full journal paper, 15 pages, double column, someone perhaps worked for a year to produce that. How much time do you have to assess the paper? Let alone going through the mathematical part and simulations, so on and so forth. The reality is that this is not easy. And second point is that this also will require expertise. Positioning a paper, the novelty, the innovativeness, unless you are very familiar about that sub area. Again, you have to believe in the author, or you have to go and check the key references and so on. But once again, it takes time. To make the story more complicated, in many cases, this immediate assessment, very difficult to anticipate the impact. To see the impact, you need a few years at the least. For instance, if there is a paper and everyone builds on that paper opens new research avenues. Of course, that is a very good paper, a paper to be celebrated, but you need a number of years to make that observation. And just giving another example, if you are an untenured faculty member, basically, you don't have that luxury because your file will be, your file might be assessed at the time of application and then again in a couple of years for tenure. And another dimension is that in many cases, we don't assess one single file, but many of them, actually a massive number of them. People from Canada would know ANSERC Discovery Grant panels. You might be given the files of 100 colleagues in Canada. Your committee, your panel should go through them. Each person uploads his or her 5 representative papers. So we are talking about 500 representative journal papers. This is not easy to go through, right? Whether it is an answer panel, or many of us served in this department in hiring committees as the department is hiring. If you can make this assessment, I guess, more easily for a short list of 4 or 5 candidates, but in the beginning, if there are more than 100 applications, once again, a thorough assessment is not pragmatic. Once again, I'm just here using the term pragmatic intentionally. That is the reality. So what is the common and easy way? Not necessarily the most scholarly approach. That is the important point. People, and maybe all of us, go to bibliometrics, okay? So number count. But actually, bibliometrics should be more than just being counting. And I have a lot to say on that. It is mainly being counting today, and it is resulting, therefore, itself many injustices and grievances, but bibliometrics can be done in a better way. So at the moment, once again, pretty much we are talking about numbers in a spreadsheet. Question, is this the best approach? Not necessarily. But I will argue that this is not a terrible approach either. Just in the next slide, I will present my views in more detail. At the moment, I am not saying that as good or bad, just be aware of the reality, especially if you are someone applying for a faculty position on someone's computer, committee member, 100 files, you will be subjected to this approach. So if you have a paper that you feel that it is a great paper, and hopefully it will be noticed by the community in the next 5-6 years that it is a great piece of work, unfortunately, most likely it will be overlooked. Most likely the committee will miss your great work because you have only 1 journal paper in the spreadsheet, others might have 10. So I am again not saying that this is good in any way. Of course it is not good, but this is the way it is. Let us be aware of this. And finally in this slide, my comment to ECRs, especially early career researchers, is that relying on the quality alone is risky. Just relying on 1 single paper, which you think is very good, is just high risk. I'm again telling this as a fact. And once again, for typical good researchers, typically good ones, if we have in front of us an exceptionally talented genius, as I am repeating myself now, this discussion may not apply to you anyway. The bottom line, at least in my view, is that in addition to quality we cannot give up for sure. I think everyone will be on board on that. But in addition to that, quantity also needs attention. Actually, I will just go through my next slide, and after that we can pause and have a discussion, because next slide continues. So, okay, I have a few other comments. I, in my group, have an approach, maybe a middle ground approach. Once again, I am not suggesting this to you necessarily, but just a piece of information. I do quality control through only publishing in reputable journals. Here I am talking about journal publications only. because conferences, you might wish to submit papers to conferences for other reasons. Like there might be a small workshop in my area, I may just want to promote that area, or there is an event in Montreal, which is very accessible, low cost. We can just take the expense issue into account. But when it comes to journals, I made this decision in 2010. So last 10 plus years, actually even before that, I was also being attentive to this. But I only publish, again, in reputable journals. This is a big discussion by itself. What does a reputable journal? I will not get into that. And I will not even make a definition here. Intentionally, I am abstaining from that because I will post this presentation on my YouTube website. Editors of some journals and so on might get offended naturally if I start giving names. But my suggestion is, as a researcher, you know your field. So what are the good journals in your field? And I am leaving the definition of good to you. Define it the way you deem appropriate and target those journals. This is my point. Actually, the next comment is interesting, a more generalized approach. If you find that restrictive, then you can publish in non-peer-reviewed venues. Now, this is interesting, isn't it? So I don't want to say advice, but my approach is, it is not good to publish in third-tier journals, because then you are actually telling everyone that, well, I submitted my paper to this venue, an unknown venue, because presumably you thought that it would be easier to publish there. So either send it to reasonably good venues, or if you have, for instance, some people have some political views about these all journal publications, good, just publish in non-peer-reviewed venues. They are valuable. And we just gave an example from Perelman, but arXiv is full of papers which never got published in any journal or conference, so they remain non-peer-reviewed, and some of them are landmark papers. Examples go to IETF in the computing societies or circles, RFCs, requests for contributions, patents, standards contributions. These are not in general peer-reviewed, but they might be good. So what I am saying is that you might be proud of your non-peer-reviewed paper in arXiv, and you can show it to everyone. But if it is a paper in an unheard journal, immediately people will question, I wonder why she or he sent the paper to that venue. Okay. Well, let me see what is the next slide. Okay, actually, I will just stop there. Again, if there is any quick comment, once again, we will have longer discussion at the end, but if there are comments at this point, you are most welcome.
I just small comment to Professor Halim. You should stop saying that if you are genius, this talk is not applicable to you, because I'm just resisting my tendency to quit the talk. I'm just joking here.
Yes, thank you, Faraj. I guess my overall point is that exceptional cases, exceptional circumstances need exceptional treatment. We are not talking about those real exceptions. But I am not here talking about mediocrity either. I guess my audience here, sorry, I take it back. I don't make a judgment on you. I prepared these slides for typically good researchers, again, ambitious researchers, people who want to do good research, make impact. I am not talking for people who target mediocrity. Just I wanted to make that clear.
Yes, Professor. Yeah, that's clear, because the outliers, you can't generalize based on them. But what you are saying is the majority, the real fact is that this is the system. This is what is existing there. We have to respect and follow. You shouldn't rely on luck or other people to understand the exceptions of our cases. Yeah.
Thank you, Faraj, for that comment. Let me continue. We will. I just see a comment in chat box. Okay, Babak, it is a long comment. Would you feel uncomfortable unmuting yourself and saying it yourself? Okay, then I'll leave everyone to read the comment in the chat box. Okay, okay, Babak, I'm sorry, you are in an exam. So let us move on. Bibliometrics. I know that everyone has a different, perhaps, view on this, and it is a contentious discussion item. Let me tell you my view from the very beginning, and I will try to justify my viewpoint. I am for bibliometrics, if done properly. My reservation is that at the moment, bibliometrics are done in a quick, halfway, and not really scholarly. Therefore, they are causing a lot of grievances. But it doesn't mean that they are bad. There are lots of goods associated to bibliometrics. So for less informed people, what do we mean by bibliometrics? These are a set of indicators, perhaps key performance indicators, used to measure the research productivity and impact of either a single researcher like you and me, or a group of researchers, let us say, people who work in the communications network area at Carleton University, or an institution, again, Carleton, for instance, or my department. Or you can use these bibliometrics to measure the impact of a conference, journal, a research field. It goes on and on. So these might be numbers or statistics, actually, distributions and so on. They can get more and more complicated. Just let me give a few examples. Obviously, if we are talking about a single person, number of publications, and again, you can make it finer, conference publications and journal publications, and then even those ones, local ones and international ones, for instance. And then the number of citations, H index, and this I-10 index, for instance, Google Scholar just produces that excuse me, that is the number of papers which collected more than 10 citations each. Or you can come up with other I indices. For instance, if we take 1,000 citation as a kind of real high impact paper, how many? So what is the I-1000 index? And the list is the list can grow and grow. Basically, imagination is your limit. For instance, an IEEE society at some point had an internal assessment process when it came to fellowship rankings. So a particular society, people apply to fellowship through a society. And one of the items that candidates or applicants, nominees were given points were I-200 index for transactions papers. Look how fine it gets. So your number of papers which collected more than 200 citations among the transactions papers, because review papers, magazine papers, it is often easier for them to collect citations. At least in that panel made a decision like that. And then there is the impact factor, for journals, especially eigenfactor. So I took these 4 from IEEE Explore. And now if you ask me what is an eigenfactor in this context, I wouldn't be able to define. But if you hover your mouse in IEEE Explore, the definition is there. And then are we talking about a career scores? Is it last 5 years? If I give an example for answer discovery grant panels, and if my recollection is correct, there it is the last 6 years. Let me make a few comments in favor of bibliometrics. Now, I mean, as researchers, we feel often very uncomfortable when people produce judgment on the quality of our research, especially with these numbers. However, remember that we are producing similar judgments on pretty much everything and anything and everything. So data and statistics are used increasingly to monitor everything. So if done properly, why not we use those to assess what is going on about the productivity of Carleton University? Again, you see my examples there, whether it is the economy of a country, there are certain indicators. Inflation, it would be one of those indicators, how healthy the economy is. By the way, how do you define inflation? Well, someone, a committee defines some maybe 200 goods that are maybe most relevant to lay person. So it tracks the inflation based as a, I guess, average or weighted average. So you might be saying that, hey, inflation is reported 3%, but this peanuts that I buy always 10% increase from last year, right? So these measures cannot be perfect. We have to accept that a priori. And in pandemic times, we all became statisticians. Every day we are bombarded with data. So I think the big advantage of bibliometrics, in a moment, I will talk about the big disadvantages, but the big advantages, the game is clear. And it brings in some sort of fairness, and I think it would minimize what we call unconscious bias. Because if the metrics are not there, you only go by your impression of the individual or the institution. And let me give an example. When these bibliometrics didn't exist, when I started my career, I would never know a professor from whom I'm taking a course on and so forth, how her or his position in research. But there would be many faculty members who were known to be as big shots. I came to realize much later that those big shots, some of them, of course, not all of them, some of them did not have any substantial portfolio. They were big shots or perceived like that because of the way, confident look and the way they talk, and mainly they have been around for a very long time. So, if I give an example from myself, I'm teaching here at Carleton for 23 years. Generations of students would know me. Oh, communications, I took a course from Professor Halim, for instance. Not that I am special, just because I am around. So if someone asks, Carleton communications, Halim, why Halim? Because he has been around for a long time. That perhaps there is no other good reason. Maybe I'm not a good teacher to start with, right? So especially these underprivileged and underrepresented classes, they are most affected from this unconscious bias. And bibliometrics, no matter how substandard and how much we dislike, it is an equalizer. So that is a big plus. Another example would be, take some Ivy League universities in the US. Once again, I don't want to give names. People would think that if you are a student or a faculty member in this top 3 ranking university in the US, then that's it. That is everything. But now we have the rankings. Rankings are based on basically bibliometrics. So let us count whether it is the number of books in the library. I guess in that case, for instance, a school like Harvard will have big advantage. But then if it is research productivity, number of, again, papers, patents, citations, whatever you want to count, let us count. Take those big universities and then look at a university you may have no impression. You may realize that it may not be that different after all. So again, I guess the same point. I like bibliometrics because in some cases, at least, it minimizes this subconscious bias. But there is the other side of the coin, therefore double-edged sword. First of all, when it comes to this spreadsheet method, just the numbers, as far as I think, currently it is done in an easy manner, not in a thorough manner. I am totally against counting the citations and showing that as an important metric. I will just, in the next 2 slides, I will make a comment about that. And then this bibliometric discussion is a new discussion. Again, when I started my career, nobody knew anyone's citation record, let alone H-index and things of that stuff. So we are still learning. And my worry or concern is that current metrics do not tell the whole story. And this third point is a terrible point. Unfortunately, I am observing it more and more. Many ECRs, early career researchers, they do research for bibliometrics. That is the worst impact of bibliometrics in my view. So you write a paper not for scholarly value, but because it will generate citation. Especially ECRs, I think this can hurt you a lot in the long run. We all know that, and probably that is my next slide, certain type of work like review works and so on, which are easily accessible to large crowd, do collect citations. But as a university professor, an academic, a postdoctoral fellow, nothing replaces the contribution to a field the way it is captured in a transactions paper. And for a variety of reasons, that paper may not collect too many citations. So the summary of this slide is that, in my view at least, and I am well aware that people will disagree with me, perhaps in part, I am for bibliometrics. These can be good. We use them anyway in anything else, but it should be done fairly and scholarly. And my concern is currently we are not there yet. So I will give two examples. Currently, there is no normalization, but that is important. If you are in the AI field, in comparison to some obscure mathematical, abstract math field, citation issue is different. So normalization should happen with respect to research field. And at Carleton, my colleagues in the software engineering part always tell me that how difficult to publish in software engineering, or people who do real experimental research. You invest $1 million equipment, 2 years of work in the field, very hard work, and one journal paper may come out of that, right? And also resources and privileges. Imagine I am being a faculty member in one of those Ivy League universities, students are coming self-funded, sent by their governments. I don't need to look for students. Best and brightest are at my door, right? Isn't that a tremendous privilege? Now, what I am telling you is that in a not necessarily high-ranking university, not necessarily in a privileged country, if a faculty member is showing really good performance, when we normalize with the resources and privileges, that person might be or should be treated as a bigger star than a faculty member in one of those privileged schools. And another example, this weighted sum in citation. In my view, one way to do this should be over time. You know, I said that it is difficult to identify good papers in the beginning, but if you wait, good papers show themselves, not all of them, but many of them. In your field, you would know very good papers that everyone builds on. For instance, I will give an example again from communications. When it comes to multiple antenna systems, MIMO, multiple input, multiple output, a landmark paper would be the work of Emre Teletar, I guess published in 1999, European Transactions on Telecommunications. And it had about 15,000 citations. There are other perhaps equally important MIMO papers, but I'm familiar with that paper. So you know, I don't need to make an assessment, or it would be bizarre for me to say that this is a good paper. For sure, it is a good paper. It collected 15,000 citation as a transactions paper, and you know, it had tremendous impact on everything in communications, no doubt. So one can go and check the references in that paper. So in that paper, if the author is relying on some 10 key references, it means that that landmark paper is influenced by those 10 other papers. In the current citation tracking, those papers get 1 point, 1 citation, but maybe they should have got 100 points, right? Because they really made a big impact. So this kind of weighted sum, I think, is important. Also, if a citation is like, for instance, connected and autonomous vehicles is a big paradigm, and then references 3 to 14. I just put 12 references. That is different than someone saying that so-and-so proved that so-and-so, and I am now extending that to a bigger area. So the two cases are very different, and I think these should be taken into account. Currently, we are not. So this is a very good time to pause. I see 5 comments in the chat box. If anyone would like to unmute herself or himself, more than welcome.
I can make a comment, Halim, if that's okay.
Of course, Paula, please.
Before joining Carleton, I was on the research side of industry. So I was in a very big company with a very big R&D department. And our internal evaluation process for hiring was differential. So for example, someone who just finished his PhD from Ivy League University in the US with 5 papers would be looked upon less favorably than someone that finished his PhD with 1 paper from a university in the middle of nowhere with no resources.
I am actually so impressed that how progressive an idea that is. This is precisely what I am saying. Mm-hmm. I am 100% on board. I'm happy that it is already happening. Very good, Paulo.
In some places, I think academia is taking a bit longer to catch on to that. We're still stuck with very absolute metrics.
Thank you very much. Any other comments? Okay, let me continue. I have about actually 5-6 more slides. We are coming to an end. Okay, so continuing on bean counting. So keep in mind that bibliometrics is more than bean counting, but citations today is mainly bean counting. A valuable paper may end up not collecting too many citations, On the other hand, a mediocre work may collect a high number of citations. Again, let us be aware of this. And the reasons are very many. I put 3 reasons for each of the categories. The good paper, it might be on a subject area that requires really expertise, some advanced analytical skills. So it wouldn't be anyone's, a starting person's really job to go and read and understand. You need fine expertise. So fewer people naturally will read the paper to start with. And the research community might be rather small in that area. And another factor is that this is also related to an earlier remark, I guess, Cihan Emre made. But first and foremost, some communities are very closed. So there is a journal, there is the editorial board, and if you look at the papers, mainly those folks' circles. So if you are an outsider, you might be a very good researcher and you might have a name in some other fields, but not in that close community. People may treat you in a biased manner, I am afraid. You know, this shouldn't happen, but it might happen. Then there is the whole other factor of bigger bias that people from developing countries and so on, that's a big discussion which I am planning to do another time in part 2. Now, on the other hand, a mediocre paper, the topic might be very sensational. And this is not something wrong, by the way. Some areas are hot and they have huge potential impact, like AI and machine learning. This is not a negative comment at all. But once again, as a fact, if I am writing a paper on AI for wireless communications, everyone pays attention. Everyone wants to understand the potential of AI in communications. And the same goes for pretty much every field. And this might become even a popular work to a large audience. And actually, this once again, the bias issue, the work might be coming from a known research group, but that known research group might be known due to the well-established faculty members, and that paper is written by a person in the group. Actually, the responsibility is on the faculty member, of course. His name is there. The due diligence should be there, but not necessarily this may happen all the time. So you are thinking that this paper is coming from that big famous group, but at the end, it might be the work of a junior researcher in that group. In particular, some overview of popular papers, they are easy to produce, they are easy to understand for others, for the readers, and they collect citations easily. I'm just telling you that here we go, another unfortunate consequence of making assessment only on citations, because I am not really saying that that work that I am referring as a popular, as something negative. The community needs that for sure. But what I am saying is that that very important contribution, because I am making AI popular in my community, isn't that bad. It is very good, but the scholarly contribution might be limited. Therefore, scholarly value, once again, might be limited. So I would like to emphasize, and probably this is the second last slide I have, transactions type papers are extremely important for all of us in academia. I give this as an example to my group. People from industry also produce papers, but ask yourself how many transactions type of papers you have seen in which all the authors are from industry. When you see authors from industry, it would be generally a collaboration between academia and industry, generally, the hard labor is done by academics, and industry people provide support in a variety of ways. But I'm asking you, how many such papers you remember? All authors are from industry. Not that people from industry are less capable. We all work with high-end labs, all PhDs and extremely talented industrial researchers, and more than that, they might have even, they have the field experience. They have that experience that I don't have, for instance, very valuable, but the dynamics of industry is not conducive. It might take a year, 2 years to pass a journal paper from the review process. We will discuss those in part 2. A revision is like sometimes writing a paper again. In some cases, a transactions paper response letter might be 30 pages, almost like writing another paper. In industry, there is no time. Your manager would be upset if they see that you are wasting time with these scholarly activities. So basically, it is an onus, a responsibility for us in academia to advance the theory, the understanding, the scholarly side. Again, if we don't do, who else will do? So in particular for ECRs, these transactions type papers are extremely important. So once again, my repeated message is quality is #1 target, but pay attention to quantity as well. So in that context, or within that viewpoint, make sure that your publications portfolio includes a decent number of transactions papers. You are most welcome, and maybe you should do, you should write type of papers which are more conducive for collecting citations, because someone unfortunately may or will likely assess you on those citations, but that shouldn't be the main focus. That is what I am trying to say, because I see increasingly young researchers are too much focused on citations only, and they are not paying attention to transactions papers. Anyhow, that concludes my talk. Well, we started at 2:30, right? So it's already 1 hour and 15 minutes. In the second part, I don't know when, but maybe in December, I will focus in particular the syntax of a paper that is scholarly rules of scholarly writing, creating the first impression response letters and resubmission strategies, so on and so forth. We will continue with the discussion. But let me stop sharing, and the floor is open for discussions. I see in a note by Shiraman. Shiraman, you are most welcome to unmute yourself, and everyone else. We have at least 15 more minutes.
Thank you, Halim. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. So in your presentation, you emphasized on transactions. So currently IEEE has more than transactions. They have this IEEE Access. They have this open journals. And also they have just journals which are not open. So some of them are fully open. You'll have to pay for the publications, and some of them aren't. So now how is this viewed? Is within IEEE, there is a tiering of publications here that transactions is on the top, and the rest of them are arranged underneath the transactions? If that be the case, then I would argue that IEEE is not doing a favor to any one of us, because it is within the organization itself, it is saying that certain journals or certain transactions are much better than others. So what are your viewpoints on this?
Yes, thank you, Shiraman. And I would welcome the viewpoints of others as well. I'll just say a couple of words. I intentionally said transactions type papers. I didn't say transactions type. By that, what I mean is thorough technical content. Basically, a transactions paper is, I guess, in the first submission, at least the transactions that I publish often, they accept 30-page single column, some of them 32. In the review process, it might grow to 35. So basically, there is an opportunity to thoroughly discuss an area, a subject matter. So if it is, for instance, spectrum sensing, you can write a comprehensive paper in 30-35 pages in IEEE single column format. I think it is valuable in that sense. And then when I say again transactions type, I mean with substantial technical novel content. Yeah, and then as you mentioned, there are actually various types of periodicals. I was planning to discuss these a little bit more in the second part. There are, for instance, journals. For instance, IoT journal. This is a periodical in IEEE. Generally, the definition of IEEE is that when it is transactions, it is a broad area. For instance, transactions on communications, transactions on wireless communications. But if it is a journal, it is a more confined area. Again, IoT journal. But quality-wise, probably the two are very comparable. Now, the open access is something very good because it is open access from that point of view. Journals and transactions, if you pay the fee, they can become open access as well. And at least in my group, most of the papers we submit immediately, we put it in archive. So they become open access before they got accepted. That is something I will discuss again, at least in the second part, when it is a good idea to post the paper in a portal. Now, one issue, not question, but again, here, I'm really not necessarily many of my comments, good or bad, but factual information. I have a lot of papers in Access. And one reason is that it is quicker. Here we go. So the reason I submitted to Access is I might have frustrated by some other journal. I had a paper in an IEEE journal recently, which got rejected with just 2 reviews after 13 months, or maybe it was 14 months. So many times requested an update. It is a black hole, 14 months, and then you get an abrupt rejection. I will not tell which journal, but in many cases, students' stakes are high. Their defense might be related to that. Not at Carleton, but as we all know, in some countries, there's these rules, again, good or bad, different, but they are there. You should have 2 journal papers accepted to go for PhD defense, whatever. So many people are getting frustrated. Therefore, you go to, for instance, Access. The review process is quick. But then again, I'm just leaving it as a fact. It is quick and may not be very thorough because when there is a time limit. So everyone makes his or her choice. I do publish in Access. I like Access, but this is the situation as far as I can see.
Thank you, Halim. The reason why I'm bringing this is because I was in a committee I was chairing a committee for PhD, and then there was a comment when it came to awarding the student, whether the student work should go for an award or so. There was a comment that was said that oh, the publications are not in IEEE transactions, it was in journals, IEEE access, and therefore of low quality. So it is our own colleagues who are making those statements in forums. And so I'm trying to understand this. How informed are they when they make such statements?
The perception is in the community that certain journals are more difficult to publish in. Again, whether this is right or wrong, that is up to, or what it means. What it means is up for discussion. Access is not necessarily one of those very difficult to publish in periodicals. Therefore, this results in some judgment. But in the long run, actually, it comes to the fact that the community decides if a contribution is valuable or not collectively in many cases.
True. It would have been much better if the concerned party had looked at the work that was done and said whether it was valuable for an award or not, rather than going back into the publication list and saying whether it is worthy for a publication or not. So, which is unfortunate that people are making such comments when they do not assess the work which has been presented to them, rather than going with something which they haven't even read.
This comes back to I guess, some of the remarks I tried to make. As far as we make the rules clear, then at least you know what the rules are.
True.
So if there is a committee, some committee, whatever that is, if their rule is that, here is how we do business, then okay, I may not agree, but okay, I know at least what you guys are doing.
True.
So the problem mainly arises when it looks arbitrary. So if they say that, well, for us, impact factor is important. So let us look at the journals. These are the high impact factor, at least IEEE ones. Pretty much all journals, we know their impact factors. We value them more. Again, you agree or not, at least you know the rules of the game. But otherwise, I very much agree that it becomes quite subjective, and this even unconscious bias issue gets into picture.
True. And interestingly, just the last comment here, when I was submitting the DG this time, I put the impact factor for the publications. I was asked to remove that, saying that, oh, you cannot do that. But at one point they said, if you don't provide this information, people cannot go hunting for the information. Therefore, you need to provide the information. So finally, I had to remove all of that. Just a point that I wanted to make, saying that we talked about impact factors. So it is up to now the reviewers to find out what the impact factors are.
Just on that point, again, we will continue hopefully this in the second part. Impact factors also change very widely,
True.
and they are not supposed, if this were a good metric, it was not supposed to change in 2 years.
Yes.
Imagine, there is I'm treating this journal as a very good journal, and then 2 years later, it is just there. This KPI, there is something wrong with that. And there is lots of backdoor politics in this game, unfortunately. When impact factor came out as a KPI, again, not too long ago, or it was not known by the public previously, maybe paid softwares were keeping track. Anyhow, what I observed in IEEE journals that I published is that editors write in the review process, they might editor reject before going to even reviewers. They would say indirectly, this paper does not seem to be fitting to this journal because there is no cited paper from this journal. It means that if you want your paper, if you are sending your paper to this journal, you must have 5-6 citations from that journal, just to artificially increase the impact factor. I have seen this many times, and it is really very annoying. This must not happen, but artificially, again, these are contributing to this wild impact factor discussion. Another, again, reason that we should do bibliometrics in a better way. It is almost 4 p.m. in Ottawa. Some people I see leaving. Any further comments? I see many seasoned researchers in the audience. If you have comments, more than welcome.
Hello, Professor Halim. This is Jiří from Brno. So first of all, great warm greetings and thank you for a great talk as always. I very much agree with your opinion on quality versus quantity. I always try to prefer with my team the quality, but sometimes, you know, we are kind of forced by basically the ecosystem, by the evaluations kind of systems which is being adopted by the university or government. But basically the quality, the quantity is kind of the preferred way. And especially like for young, you know, researchers or PhD students, when they need to deliver as a part of their study requirements, certain number of publications each year, it's kind of impossible to really invest 1 year into just one transaction type paper. So unfortunately, this is the current situation. As you said, this is kind of the part of the game where we are in. So would be nice to have some change here, but probably it's kind of out of our scope at least, or out of our hands.
Thank you, Jiří. Jiří is from Brno University of Technology in Czech Republic, a long time friend. We even have a joint paper. I totally agree. Therefore, quality is the prime factor in my view, but especially for more vulnerable researchers, those are ECRs, people like me. I already had my promotions and so on. Perhaps still important, I have my answer, discovery renewals, so on and so forth, like everyone else. But people who are in the academic job market and so on, you really cannot dismiss all these factors, how the business is done, how the assessments are done, whether we agree or not. Therefore, I just cannot, I think it will be irresponsible for me to tell our ECR colleagues that forget about metrics, forget about citation. Doesn't make sense because you will be evaluated based on those. So therefore, without jeopardizing the quality, my approaches or advice, if I may say that, if you don't find it arrogant, my advice would be pay attention to quality, but keep in mind the quantity and all these metrics. At least be aware of how assessments are made.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
So let us leave it there. Thank you very much. I will post this at my YouTube website, and we will continue with the second part at some other time. Thank you very much.